and start a streaming. Alrighty, we are live. So I'm going to shuffle around with my foolish gear here and figure out what I'm doing. And I'm going to want to throw the chat up for anybody who shows up, which probably somebody will. Because we are doing our thing. Hey, Lorenzo. And bam, we got a chat up. And we're doing another coding stream. And I really need to move this freaking window because it will force me to stare at it all day long. Which looks like this. I'm looking at my face in the window, but it looks like I'm completely ignoring the camera. Gamma, hey, yeah, it worked well. I'm not sure whether I'm excessively loud. I think maybe I kind of am. Style that back half a hair. I do have a nice, convenient green meter on OBS, so I'll assume that if I peek out to be clippy and go up to green or yellow, that should suffice. And this should be all that I need. So I'm going to scooch that off the screen for now. So, yay, here we are. I got a variety of new things, but the biggest and most important new thing is Console 7. And that's going over well, which I'm not terribly surprised because it came out good. Let me switch over to our marvelous world of coding. We're going to go back into matrix verb again. Don't mind me fooling endlessly with settings and things, as one does. Let's see now. I should also keep half an eye on my wood stove because it's running kind of hot. Nah, it'll be fine. Joku, Seiko Van. Yeah, I'm starting to think in terms of doing more in the way of mixing myself. It's been interesting the last couple of days getting that together. I mean, I built Console 7 kind of at the last minute. It's weird the way that worked out because like up until the last day I had it set up doing its smoothing with averaging filters instead of the biquads. So in the very last minute, I put in the biquads and it made all the difference. It made it amazing. Yeah, Lorenzo, you're going to want to use the gain control in Console 7. You could use purest gain before it. It would still work, but you will completely fail to get the thing in the gain control in Console 7, whereas you push it louder, it comes a little forwards and gets a little more saturated. As you cut it back, it gets a little less saturated and drops a little back. That's going to make mixing a lot easier, and it works really well. So you're going to want to use the one on the Console 7 thing, presumably mostly the channels, but also the bus plugin works the same way, although that goes up to 1, goes up to full crank. So let me see. I was a tiny bit late getting going because I was doing a thing. Stop that. What are you doing? Actually, no, that was correct. And that thing was using my little USB stick shuttle, which is what I move plugins from this work computer to the real computer. This time I'm using it to move over some video files. So the fader in the console channel on console 7 does something different than just adjusting the gain beforehand. The deal with running console, and the reason that you're not supposed to do the fader in the DAW, which is post plugin, is because it'll do literally the opposite of what you'd want. If you use the fader in the DAW, in any version of the console system, and you push it up, you're pushing stuff into the saturation curve in such a way that it's going to desaturate a little harder than it saturates, and it will make the end result slightly more expanded, which is the opposite of what you'd want for getting stuff louder. So it'll make stuff louder and it'll also pull it back slightly. Whereas if you pull the fader down in the console system on the DAW, what will happen is it will be more distorted relative to not being expanded as much on the bus. So it'll essentially, you will be cutting it back, but then it will come forward slightly. And these are not the motions you want in a mix. If you're making stuff louder or quieter, it probably is because you want it more up front or to settle it back into the texture of things. So what Console 7 does is processes extra. It's 3 stages of gain trimming on the console plug and 2 on the bus plug, specifically for the purpose of applying the contrary processing, so that if you boost in the channel plug, it will also make it more saturated at the same time as making it slightly louder. It works out. It's basically just get used to using that because it does work better. You'll be able to get a mix together quicker. It should just make stuff fall into place. And it's also similar to what you'd get out of an actual recording console. Typically, if you make stuff be louder, you're going to be saturating it a little more at the same time. So it mimics that, but it mimics it in a very sort of refined way. And you shouldn't necessarily have to make all the instruments about the same level. Just track them in at some reasonable level, and then use consoles. There's no requirement that they all have to be hitting the same level going in. It's like with Console 7, now you have a slight boost zone. You can push stuff up a little bit more, and as always, you can pull it back a little bit. Regarding the reverb question, Reverb does this. See, Reverb. This is my dual householder algorithm reverb. I was considering adding all pass filters in there, and that is still something that we could try to do. And 0772 on console is not a special number, it's just what happened to be exactly unity gain. So we have this evolving reverb. Like, as I keep doing it, I get new stuff added, like the springiness, gets me more of a spring reverb quality. Vibrato is what's damping stuff down. With none of it, I don't think 772 is significant in any way. It just happened to be it. We also have a sort of plate verby-like quality. I don't remember what factor did, if anything. But we can find out soon enough. Cross mod. So let's see. So fader 8 was factor. I do not believe we are using that. We're using, in fact, fader 7. And that's what gave us, cross mod is what gave us the springiness control. We fiddled with it in a number of ways. Oh wait, I'm just fooling with room size. I got the wrong slider. So we get a whole bunch of different sounds out of this, and this no longer does anything. So I can actually stop this now and go back here. We're going to do that thing where we fool with the controls and put stuff back when we're not using it, so it's not reading things that we're not using. Lorenzo, you got to use your ear for that. It's a very soft sort of distortion, but you got to use your ear for that. It's the whole point of the distortion is that it's not a hard edge. In fact, I was fussing endlessly with things like that it's using spiral, which is already a very soft distortion, but it's blending in a little bit of the density algorithm as well. And all throughout there, I was balancing the overall system so that as gain kept coming in, it would hit and introduce harmonics at the same time rather than favoring one harmonic or another, and that it would hit and not start introducing high harmonics at any given point. So there should be a very soft onset of clipping. In other words, you shouldn't be able to hear it in an obvious way anyhow. Oh, interesting. 772 is a part of a... if you figure out what it actually is relative to, like, maybe it's sine of 1 or something, I don't know. But by all means, share it with chat. Meanwhile, what I'm doing is we're continuing to fool with matrix reverb for a couple of hours. It's actually going to be about an hour and a half. I'm probably not going to go super late. I don't actually have any big commitments, but I'm going to chill out the end of the evening. Brady Haran, number file, woot. And yeah, one of the things I was doing was figuring out whether I could use all passes. You've even got it written as a note. Put in some all passes. I could do that. It might change what I'm getting in terms of the springy sound, but it might not change it all that much. Yeah, I'm looking at this kind of stuff here. So I've got a variety of questions. Here's my Xcode. And I'll be working on this, but here's one of the things. I have every intention of making a set of reverbs. Like, we're probably going to continue to have this called matrix verb. And this is going to be the one, much like versions of my tape plugins, which the tape plugins are going to need some addressing as far as this new discovery of gently applying the anti-aliasing filters, because that is a obvious win in two fronts. One of them is obviously the tape plugin is doing saturation, so applying the filtering should directly and immediately help it. Secondly, the way I'm doing console in this way and applying the filters, there's 3 different filters for the console system. And they're using the parameters from Isolator, but at exactly 20K. And the parameters from Isolator are like sort of golden ratio related, in that you've got a steep filter of 1.6180339, etc., and that is the sharpest of the filters, and it is somewhat resonant. It's more resonant than Butterworth filter. It has a boost at the edge. Then you've got the 0.618 as another filter of the same frequency, and then you have a 0.5. What happens when you combine those is the one with the peak at the end, the other two, the one that is 0.6033, etc., 618.033, etc., has a differently shaped peak that fills in the gaps where the other one existed. And the full edge of it will be down a little bit. And then the one that is 0.5 is not even a resonant filter. It's softer than a resonant filter. It's not as sharp as you could get. And that pulls the output of everything down a bit. So you have a kind of pre-emphasis and de-emphasis from using that. As long as you go through those 3 filters with those 3 resonance settings, the end result will add up to be flat. But since the first one that you hit is a 1.618 Q, a 1.618 resonance, we have console and any future filter like tape, which is an obvious call for doing this with. You're pre-emphasizing into the distortion and then de-emphasizing after the distortion, meaning that you're softening the clip. And that's going to work great. That's what happens in actual tape recordings. So yeah, it's an obvious call. And yeah, here's the thing. I was mentioning the tape plugins, and I have 2 tape, which is incrementing version by version, and then I have this one called tape, which has already been through a subtle update where not that subtle of an update, I added a control, but it's because people desperately wanted the head bump control. And what I'm going to be doing is probably throwing a new version of 2 tape, which may or may not, I don't know, with the concept of that one, it's almost like, why don't I just throw choice over the saturation factor or something like that, because people always want a million controls when they don't want to actually work on anything. They just want to play with controls. Where tape is the one that doesn't have a version number behind it. I feel basically comfortable keeping it the way that it is, but adding the anti-aliasing ultrasonic filter to it. I think that is something that I can do, and I will leave a download for the previous version if people need to get exactly the one that they had. But I'm keeping a line of plugins where there's the ones with all the sliders, and then you can fiddle around for hours dialing in the perfect thing, or maybe if you're a sound designer or something like that. And then there are ones that I personally use when I'm mixing something that are set up to do exactly the right thing. and only that exactly the right thing. So if you trust me, you use the one that is simpler, and instead of using like 2-tape 27 or whatever, you use just tape, and it is my notion of the best performance for that thing. And all the little controls that could be set wrong to get weird effects and stuff aren't there. What I really wanted tape to be was like a no controls one. That's not all that practical, so I ended up absolutely having to have, I think I have a boost in there, but I think I also had to add the head bump control because it was just too fat. Otherwise, you had to be able to dial it back about halfway. But I'm currently working on Matrix Verb, and I need to find some magic settings in Matrix Verb that I can build into a plugin that will simply be called Reverb. And that needs to sound like air in a space. I'm not sure whether it will also include like, I mean, I could have a dedicated one called spring reverb or a plate reverb if this variation one is not satisfactory, but there's a particular thing I'm zoning in on as far as what would work best. And I want to find the correct answer, and it's stuff like this. You can probably search this on YouTube. This is a YouTube video, and it is recordings of somebody that is in a giant concrete cistern called the Dan Harpole cistern. This was some sort of fallout shelter or something like that. And it is a real space made of concrete with all these concrete pillars that is enormous. Enormous, huge space. And it has like a 53-second reverb time. This is what will show me what the accurate decay sound of air actually is, including any little details as far as how the sound kind of tails off. I don't think I'm going to get like somebody clapping in there, like, but what you're hearing is this video playing. And they're making some kind of noise. They're walking around in there. And referring to this video and listening to particular noises as they fall off, I can try to replicate that with reverb. I can also make it so that this is the maximum decay, because this is probably accurately the maximum decay. Like Matrix Verb will give you infinite reverb. That's not air. Air doesn't have infinity in it. Air has friction and it decays. So the sounds in this are simply a microphone that is put up, and it is giving us a real-world sample of what you get in the ultimate size of reverb. And this is how the highs fall away in air. This is how the lows fall away. This is how sounds build up and sustain. And I can use this as reference. Like, I don't have to measure it so much as just recognizing this. Maybe I can go and find some kind of, like, people talking. Oh, there's somebody close to the mic. And it's not so much a reverb based on this, as I knew this existed, this Dan Harpole cistern. So anything that's happened in here, you know, and this video was somebody's music. So like I can't, although it's kind of hard to recognize, I think. And this type of drone music, I don't think I'm going to get copyright struck for this. It's not like playing the Beatles. But when you make music this way, this is an example of basing a musical composition around the fact that you're in this cistern and this is your instrument. So if I can do the one thing, I can do this. You can take tracks and pump it into the reverb and be able to do this. And I know, right? I keep getting copyright strikes on my white noise videos. So you hear this is somebody's musical piece, and they're playing various instruments. I've heard other stuff like this happening. And the incredibly deep reverb sound is what you get out of this exact reverb. Same room, same behavior. So if I can duplicate the one, I can duplicate the other. And it sounds like that. It sounds like, listen. Hear the high, that's somebody bonking something metal against something or dropping something. And you can hear how it's, that falls away quicker than you'd expect. And that's because the acoustics of air, this is why you have thunder instead of lightning just going forever. You have thunder because the acoustics of air have the high frequencies die away real quick. So we're going to spend some time after perhaps trying the all-pass thing, but we're going to spend some time trying to model that. I wonder whether I have, well, I do have a snare silence, so there's my example. And we've got our matrix verb, and if we do that, that's not very much regeneration at all. But duplicating the exact tone of the fall off, like here with vibration depth, vibrato depth, at 0, meaning that we have no interpolation happening. I might also end up doing something like we're slowly shifting to different it depends upon, remember how I talked about how when you have a vibrato going into your reverb, you get a fatter sound of the reverb? These recordings of the actual cistern what are this relatively quiet? They're not doing anything in here. Ah, we're making some noises. But I can try to get a sense out of this of how much those pitches are wandering over the course of different period. Somebody's singing some notes in there. It does spread, kinda. But then as we go back to twisted wave here, shut this off and go to our note silence, here is where we can figure out what the correct blending of pitch is. So we have our ultimate infinite regeneration. But it's not going to do this. Cool sounding though it is. So what our goal is going to be when we start dialing in these figures, and I can do that on stream, there's no reason I can't, is to replicate the sound of how much that's spreading relative to how much this spreads. Clearly not that. In fact, we can probably have quite a slow vibrato speed, but it's not going to be drastic. Like that's too much. It changed note. But the spreading is important because that gets us some of the sound. So that's about that speed of pitch vibrato. Yeah, this is effectively the sound of an incredibly loud tone, so there's that. Even slower. A little over a second, that might work. And less depth, because no depth is infinite sustain. So we're going to be dialing in a regeneration and a vibrato depth that gives us the spreading. And this is starting to get us into that zone of there's a certain darkening, but we're probably going to be using more darkening still. And the small amount of vibrato depth is starting to interpolate into an adjacent sample and back again, but it's not going so far that it's giving us an obvious, try a little faster. And we're probably going to want to pull back the regeneration because otherwise this will go forever. And the reality is 53 seconds. Reality is not forever. Actually, here's something we can do. Let's put that aside for the moment. So RT60 of 53 seconds A. I think that's what the idea is. I'm going to take a moment and I'm just searching for Dan Harmon Cistern RT60. And maybe I don't have the right, is that Dan Harpole? What am I thinking of? Dan Harmon is a writer. Yeah, there we go. 45 reverb time probably means RT60. That's probably, yep. Fort Worden Cistern, RT60, 45 seconds. So therefore, what is RT60? That gives us 45 seconds. And we'll go from there. We'll delete it, and now this entire thing is 45 seconds of looping. So back over to the other computer, RT60 means 60 dB down. Therefore, now this is twisted wave. And it's letting me adjust this in such a way that I will be able to check that out, but I may also be able to, yeah, see we've got a -60 on this meter here. So theoretically, can you see that? Can you see the meter? Can you see the meter in the 60? Because this is literally something that we can do as a little test. And I need to make the beep at the beginning be full scale, I think. Let's normalize that to damn near full scale. Good loud beep. Then what we're going to do is full with matrix verb, and let's see whether we can get into a zone here. And again, here's what the real cistern sounds like. Right up front, there were some events as somebody making a noise in the distance, a loud click. So I want to quickly hear what that sounds like as far as what the high frequencies falling off sounds like. Because I got a feeling that I can tune this vibrato Yeah, there was the noise. Or at least there was a noise. Might have been a little close to the mic. I'm waiting for somebody to like drop a wrench or something. A good loud click or clap sound. That's high frequency. I think we're clearing out of here. Let me bounce around a little bit. Because technically, I should be able to listen to the reverb tail and hear if there was probably a bright sound at some point, because I can skip around and at some point it'll kind of be going and it'll be the decay of whatever the reverb tail was doing. Yeah, they're starting to sing. You can make a loud noise in a place like that, I'm telling you. I was once in a situation where I was hanging out with some folks that had just done a live performance and run sound for actually a convention, a fandom convention, where they had, tens of thousands of watts in these giant line source speakers in a big old room, and did a really loud show, sort of a bunch of like dance music type stuff. And then there was an after party, and the after party was in a much smaller room with a tiny little PA system. Trouble is, the big show was in a big old auditorium kind of place, and it had some facility for the sound dying away rather than just building up infinitely. Like there were large quantities of drapes somewhere or something like that. Whereas the small room, hard surfaces, high ceiling, it was more reverberant than you would think. And the fellow that was doing the DJing in this small party was setting his volume louder than the talking, and the talking was getting louder and turning to shouting, and he was pushing the volume even farther, and it was just building up until it was physically painful in there. And there was a little fight between the sound engineer that had run the big room and the guy that was getting to run the small room but was hurting people with volume. In the small room with this much more limited system, he was making far more painful volume than the giant's, tens of thousands of watt system. It's a very interesting thing how that works. And that works in a place like this cistern as well. Like if you can feed enough volume into it over a long enough period of time, the overall loudness is just going to continue to build. So let's see, what we were doing was listening for a click.
A witch is coming down here.
Some of the S sounds were interesting. They were falling off a lot quicker than you'd imagine. There's some noises. Yeah, it kind of lingers a little bit, but it does fall back quite a lot. So now we're going over to here. On the whole, of course, it probably would work better with a larger room size. The factors that I'm working with are probably also going to be a factor of room size. Like the more room size would require more vibrato depth out of this. It's going to scale to some extent. See? And come to think of it, I've got it set to a springiness. Let's set that to 0.5 just to maximize the effect. See, if we start doing lots of vib depth here, maybe I can also do something here. Let me shut this off for a moment. I should be able to start this with a click. Let's make sure to start it with a tick. And then maybe not make it as long as this, but end it in here with another tick. See, if we choose that, we're guaranteed to have a bright click on the edges of this sine wave thing, so it's not smooth. It's the opposite of what one of my synthesizer things does, or the square wave tremolo thing that I did, of waiting until the zero crossings. Instead, this is waiting until the not zero crossing. So when we feed this into the, let's clear the markers, go back to our reverb, and now we should get more of a sense of what the brightness would be. And then we can also do our 45-second thing, because remember, RT60 means if this is going to duplicate that cistern, I run this sound, it should fall away at about the right speed. And then, Music Player was talking about how physical objects would do that. Do what? Well, the deal with how you get vibrato in the real world is sound passing through areas of different temperature. It's much the same as when you look over a highway or something like that in a desert, and you see the waves coming off of it, heat waves. That is temperature actually modulating light. Compared to that, sound is easy. So in a physical sense, what vibrato means is the speed of sound is changing over these locations. So we get some of that, and the question is how much? And also there's a question of how much regeneration do we need? So let's do our quick little example. So if this is the same as that cistern, the meter that you probably can see, I'm not sure whether you can see it or not. Well, we got 45 seconds to find out, so OBS, yes you can, but you can't see where the 60 is. I can, you can't. Now you can. So this needs to have fallen off the bottom of the thing by the time we hit the end. It is not going to do that. This is more reverb than can exist in the real world. So that's not going to work. Oh, Heath Antonio. Glad you mentioned that. Apple needs to fix their stuff. Or you need to roll back off of the Big Sur update. Bottom line. I'm making stock Core Audio unit plugins. If other people's plugins are using, there's no reason mine shouldn't. This is a bug in Logic. I've changed nothing, and they're responsible for not breaking their own stuff. If they break their own stuff, I can't be held responsible for that. There is not going to be an update for Big Sur. It would involve throwing away everybody else. That is never going to happen. So I would say bug Apple. And it's kind of dark, but yeah. A lot of people aren't moving to Big Sur simply because they're like, oh God, I'm going to be in trouble. This is not going to work. Bear in mind, this should be easy. This is stuff that my plugins don't contain within them. They don't draw their own interface. And I know because somebody else brought it up and I've been talking to people about it. The problem apparently is that like Logic or whatever is not drawing the sliders or letting you manipulate the sliders, but that's not inside the code of my plugin. That's inside the code of the DAW. And Apple is capable of fixing this. If they can make other people's stuff work, they can make that work. And they're going to need to do it. Back to the happier times of reverbs and things. So like I said, firstly, I'm going to see whether I can work out, I know, Apple. Well, I think it's fairly likely they will get around to it, but somebody needs to light a fire under them, because if they're doing this on purpose, then we are at war. They don't get to do that. And if they're doing it by mistake or something, they're capable of fixing it. This is not going to be something that is super difficult. I would say it would be much more difficult to fix like other people's complicated plugins running in everything from Carbon to Cocoa to whatever. And all of that GUI stuff is actually harder to deal with. What I'm doing is not hard to deal with, and it's running on the fundamental base of how this stuff works. Like, this is stock Core Audio code. So my take on that is that they're not allowed to break that. That is something that needs to kind of stay the way it is. And they have more than enough money. They have more than enough technical support to be able to fix this. So it's going to be up to them. Like, this is a deal breaker as far as I'm concerned. They have to fix it, because they're not going to get me to do anything else around. It would involve being forced onto new versions of the like Xcode and whatever to comply with the new processor architecture and so on that fail to support all of the previous stuff. And bear in mind, what you're seeing right now is Snow Leopard. It is macOS 10.6.8, chosen because I, by definition, support all of the old machines, and they should all just work. This is not negotiable to me. If I have to, I'll move over into doing, like, I was going to tell people about this, right? I was going to mention stuff like this. Like, you can't see it because you're on the coding screen. I was going to mention stuff like this. This is a trim pot. I'm continually moving forwards into my hardware synthesizer DIY stuff. It's a Panasonic trim pot. It is 200 ohms. I believe what I can make out of these are hi-hats. This could also be used for being the voltage starve control for a chip that needs to be kind of softer and grungier. And it comes in these. This is 1,000 of them. And you can get stuff like this for cheaper if you get them in quantity. For instance, in this case, that is a quantity of 1,000 in this box. And these parts, if you were getting the full-size controls, it could be $1 or so each. And if you're getting them in smaller amounts, you might be able to get it for like 6 cents or whatever. I got 47,000 of these parts. 1 cent each. 1 cent part. I'm setting myself up to be able to give people access to these tools for so ridiculously cheap that I can just give the parts away. So, I mean, if Apple wants to burn bridges with me, I will go and do something else and continue to make and support my stuff, but I don't have to follow Apple in the direction they're going unless they're willing to do it in a way that I find morally acceptable. It's as simple as that. Let's go back to our coding, which again, this is on Snow Leopard. The stuff that I'm making should work on any old machine that you've got. You don't have to have the latest and greatest to do Console 7, etc., everything. Honestly, doing audio is not that hard. The folks doing video on stuff like 4K and 6K video, those are the folks that really need and benefit from having latest and greatest in the escalation of capability. You shouldn't have to have that kind of power to do music. People should be able to get their hands on stuff where they can do music in their computers for much, much more cheaply. I mean, some of the old machines, like my stuff supports PPC machines. There are older Mac laptops. I have one. I got one from my brother. Where they are PowerPC machines. My plugins run on them. And they have built-in optical digital interfaces. Not necessarily high speed or high quality or whatever, but such as you could get an outboard converter that outputs optical digital, plug it into the input, and be running high quality outboard conversions and do extremely extensive music work on a PowerPC Mac laptop. This doesn't have to be that hard. This doesn't have to be this inaccessible. You shouldn't have to go and get the latest and greatest thing out of Apple just to keep going. So let's get back to the stuff I was doing earlier, namely fooling with these reverb sounds like this. And duplicating it in this. But one thing we might try to do is, this is actually sounding like about the right vibrato amount for this. Pull it back just a hair. Try again. And like I said, I'm going to have to tie this to room size. Like I think I'll have to tie it to, I suppose I could experiment and find out, couldn't I? But that initial tick felt about right. So now the question is, can we get it to die away completely past this RT60 point using the regeneration control and pulling it back just a hair? So that it drops off the end of that meter by 45 seconds. We have a 45-second track, and I'm saying that's not going to happen, so that's more than we need, and we'll try again. Whoa, that's way less than we need. Because that's literally the definition of what RT60 is. It should be dropping off the meter at exactly that time. And it has dropped off too soon, so more than that. And I got a feeling that's going to go for much too long. Because again, what we're doing is we are replicating real life. I'm replicating air in this. I want to work out what it would take to have this reverb intrinsically do exactly what air does. That's my goal. That's what it should be able to do. And this is not enough. So let's scooch it over like this. Once I get that dialed in, I'm probably going to fool with room size a bit and see what happens. Because the thing is, here's how this works, is room size, regeneration is tied to the way the room feeds back into each other. Do I have any degrees? Only when I have a fever. I had degrees last March when I got really sick. But yeah, room size, regeneration is tied to room size and needs not to be. If you're doing like the little tiny short reverb, it should be echoing faster, but air acts the same. So if it was the same rigidity of walls, yeah, me too. Me too. Likewise. And it's not necessarily a great thing. It would have been nice if I had gone to a school and had support from my family and so on, where I could do that. But like, I have autism, and I was growing up in, like, I'm 53. I was growing up in a world that had no idea what that was. So my schooling and my life in those early years was just an increasing amount of freaking out until I was just super traumatized and couldn't cope with anything. And school was very much part of that. Like, I couldn't face it. I really couldn't do it. It just kind of went from bad to worse. And there's a whole story around that. But I didn't drop out because I couldn't think or because I couldn't do some of the work. Although I always got a really hard time from getting harassed, because it's like, you're only doing the kinds of work that you want and you're not even trying to do the work that you don't. And I'm like, no, I can't wrap my head around the work that I don't. But it would have been nice, like somebody who was in my life once was deeply moved by how tragic it was that I didn't get to go to like MIT rather than like simply dropping out of school. As far as they were concerned, it's like, you should go to the hardest the school colors of MIT are called blood on concrete, red and gray. That is in some ways the most demanding, strenuous, nasty place that you could go as far as that. But for somebody like me, I would just be experimenting away like crazy, and I'd be in the middle of all those laboratories and stuff, and I'd be building like killer robots to go on BattleBots, which is playing again now. I'd be doing all that kind of stuff and wouldn't even notice the fact that it was supposed to be an education. I would just be doing. But I didn't. That is not something that was available to me, so now I just have to do that on my own. And I do, but I also share it with people on live streams, and that's what we're doing. So, to get back to that, room size needs to be tied to regeneration in such a way where we're getting the same RT60 each time. Tiny room size, long room size, it really shouldn't matter. So I'm going to have to come up with an algorithm for that, and that might be what I do today. But this coming up with a regeneration value here is finding the one where it falls away at the right speed, so that 45 seconds later it is hitting minus 60, because that's RT60, and that's as near as I can work out to the accurate behavior of air in a perfect space. We're going to call this Dan Harpole cistern a perfect space, at least as far as reverb is concerned. Maybe it would be really terrible if like you were down there and there were no lights and you had no food and you starved. That would be terrible. But as far as sound is concerned, we're talking definition of perfect ultimate reverb. Everything else is going to be shorter or more damped or something. And that just about did it. That looked a lot like exactly the same kind of thing. So 0.79, See, right now if I change room size and I make room size be something else, what's going to happen is if it's slower, then that will stretch out the regeneration. But in the real world, if we make the space larger, that doesn't change the behavior of air. RT60 in this situation is limited by strictly how air itself behaves. Everything else is concrete. Nothing is moving. There's not going to be a lot of absorption by just air vibrations there. It's like literally perfect. So we need to, and also if I make the room size be much smaller, it's going to die away much quicker. I can even demonstrate that. Much smaller. And seconds later, it's already just about gone. But it really needs to hang on for 45 seconds on that, and it's not. Whereas room size of ginormous what we're going to get is it's going to hang out there like indefinitely. We're going to get to the 45-second mark and it's still going to be going. This is not how it should work. It needs to fall away at the same speed regardless of what the shape of the environment is, because it's the air that's causing it to fall out. You don't get to make a larger space and then just have air become springier and work better. And we're demonstrating that now. Like we're still over minus 30 dB and hitting the end. So this needs to be fixed. Let's set this to 0.1 and see whether we're in the zone there. Maybe it was more, no, we'll call it 0.1. Kind of clangy sounding, but still. And we're going to start to figure out what the algorithm needs to be for this. And again, that's going to drop off before we quite hit 45. It's not bad, but it's not sounding like that cistern. And see, it's gone. Or it's effectively gone. So that's not good enough. Let's try regeneration of 0.8, bearing in mind that it's going to be affected somewhat by vibrato depth. I've currently got that to just sort of replicate temperature changes. And if you were down in this system and like you built a fire on one side of it or something, or brought a heater to one side of it, you could probably set up the physical cistern to start doing some freaky pitch modulation stuff in there. You'd have one side of the cistern to be cold and the other side of the cistern to be really warm. It wouldn't last, but while you were doing it, you'd probably be able to get really bonkers pitch stuff happening in there, in the real world, in physical air. That's my guess. I'm not absolutely certain that would happen, but I'm thinking that's probably what would happen. So let's see, we've got room size 0.1, regeneration 0.8. That's a complicated... I've got a lot going on in that, so the regeneration is really much, much closer to 0.9999999 and so on. But 0.8 is what we've got for the time being. Might be fun to come up with a constant for regeneration, not even have it as a control. Instead, you control it by doing the cross modulation, the springiness or the platiness. That might be effective. So now we want to see whether or not this is going to give us the correct RT60. And it's looking pretty good. I think maybe it's falling away just a hair too fast. Yeah, it's reaching that point and we haven't hit the bottom yet. So a little more. 0.81. Almost anything you put into the feedback loop is going to have a huge effect immediately. Like here, it's interpolation blend. We're starting to get this little grindy noise. That's something I'm going to listen to in the real world example too. Like, I know we can make it go darker, but I also want to hear whether the real world air behavior is going to look for a different interpolation blend here. And this is acting about right. Yeah, I'm going to call that fine. So we've got about the right setting. Here, let's fool with that while we're at it. I'm trying to listen for the sort of tone of the reverby darkness. And then let's see whether we can replicate that tone with this sine by bringing more of this air in. I think we're actually going to want... Well, firstly, let's see what we get out of a 50-50 blend. It's instantly a bit darker, but at full interpolation, it just goes super dark and stays there. Whereas I feel like and that's a little hard to do with this, so it'll give us those presets back. So let's save note silence since now we're doing it at 45 seconds and go to snare silence and tell that to be 45 seconds. We'll zoom in a little bit and I'm going to want to do both. There we go. And I guess we'll use the actual snare hit there. Zoom in until it's showing us individual seconds and go to 45. Boop. And there we are. Here's our snare 45 second sustain. And with the same matrix verb setting, move this to where you can see it, it should do the same thing. Although this room size is rather small, so it's kind of clangy. And again, I'm feeling like, hear how when we're doing this regeneration the way that we're doing it? That's very bright. So it needs to die away from that a lot faster. But listen to what it does in the real one. There. Those noises don't just go. So we're going to try to hang on to some of that. And again, even though it's a small room size, what have I done? Regeneration is not the control I was reaching for. 0.81 is where we left off. Interp blend is the control I was reaching for. So, too dark, too bright. We need to get some of this so that it's going to fall away, but it'll fall away at about the same speed as this stuff here. So let's have at it. And as far as this high quality reverb making, there's a lot that goes into it. Something like that householder algorithm that I've been working on is somebody hit upon that. And the brilliance of that is just the fact that you can set the regeneration to be infinite. And it'll give you this continuous like whoosh that keeps going without settling on any one frequency. That's a very good breakthrough. So some of that stuff, and I did not think of that one. That's just something that exists out there in the literature on reverbs. But as far as the high quality reverb making, just getting a million settings into a usable, controllable plugin, that's more like how I do it, is finding these things in the algorithm that you can do. Like Interp Blend doesn't exist in other people's plugins. Interp Blend is, do I have the feedback of the vibrato interpolating between samples, which makes things go way darker really fast, or do I have it just jumping from one to another, which makes these high frequency tizzy noises, namely this. Now that bright stuff isn't realistic, but that fell away too fast. So I'm experimenting with it and going like, what setting do I need? Where it falls away and sounds like bright noises in that cistern. Too fast? Maybe still too fast, but it's getting there. It turns out that this is a useful thing, especially with the room size being what it is. This is a small room size. Interp Blend might need to shift the other direction as the regeneration to compensate for room size. I'm not positive. But that's starting to sound kind of like what the desired effect would be. Because our room size is much smaller, but it should have the same fall off. Those are about the right kinds of sounds. So, not enough fall off. Still not quite enough. And there we have something that starts to sound a little like the way the highs are falling off. So we're getting somewhere with this. And again, that's going to be probably tied to room size. Like if I do a much larger room size, if I go from 0.1 to 0.3, it's not really falling off. Well, it's not all that wrong either. But the thing about it is the regeneration and interpolation blend needs to be relative to the air rather than the size of the room, because the size of the bounces, I'll see you later now, Lorenzo. The size of the bounces is not the increment by which we want to measure these things. So let's see. I had 0.1. And that was giving us a fall away that was pretty plausible sounding. Let's close this down and save it as our 45-second RT60. It sounds kind of yucky the way it is, so I might as well use the note one. And this should be the RT60, much like in the cistern. Although I could fool with the gain there a little. Oh, actually, no. This is a post gain, so I don't have to worry about that. It's sounding a little nasty, what with the room size being so small. And again, the way that works is that if it's too small, the cycle of all these things repeating are going to happen too quick, and the regeneration will fall off too fast, and interp blend will happen too often. So regeneration needs to be longer for small times, but interp blend needs to be smaller for small times. They're going in the opposite direction, and as you can see, that one has already failed to stretch as long as it needs to for the RT60. So I think it's time we dove into... We do have two controls here to play with. Time to dive into the code, and maybe we will arrive at the solution to this experimentally. In other words, here's slider 8 and slider 9. I'm also going to have to remember to copy it to the output, because last time I ran a variation on this, I didn't even install it in. I might have to quit all of these things, Twisted Wave and QuickTime Player. But reg offset. Now we have controls for these guys. And it's one of the problems with having the sliders and having so many controls, which is why I often try to avoid having that many controls, is that there's just a pile of identical sliders and you can't really tell what's what. This is an advantage of GUIs when people do use them. They can cause problems, but you can have some of the knobs be bigger and some of the knobs be smaller and such, and find your way around that way. The way I do things really works best for the style of plugins that I prefer to do, where there's not that much going on with them. So let's see. So we've got these offsets going on. And so now we're doing something with those knobs. And what we're going to do is we're going to manipulate what we have here And the question is how. Like depth factor is one of our controls. So we're going to manipulate that to some extent. And then cross mod is, well, no, hang on. Okay, where did I get that? Interblend is parameter 5. So parameter 5 is the one that I'm going to want. And parameter 5 is blend. It wants to be close to 1, and there's nothing further going on with it, so yeah, this is how that one works, and that's how we bleed in that other stuff. We tend to want to use a lot of the other stuff, so blend will be this 0 to 1 factor, and higher means closer to 1. And we're going to move these so that we can access these parameters once we start actually working with it. So those offsets now are above these, so we can use them in these algorithms. So what are we going to do? We're going to do, the regen is 1 minus get parameter param4. And we're going to work on size, which is our room size, and that's going to be multiplied by 99.0 and plus 1.0. I'm adding the 0.0 so that I remember that it's a floating point number rather than an integer. It gets turned into integers here, but what we've got there, and let's move that up here as well, because we need to have all these things figured out before we start putting in the manipulation of these two parts here. And it looks like we've copied those and they still exist down here, so we can make that go away now. And I'm damned if I know why I have a dry equals 1.0 minus wet. Am I really using that? Okay, that's dumb. We try to take these away. That's from old template code. Thought I'd fix that. Obviously not. Yeah, I mean, the difficulty, Stephen, with doing artificial reverbs like this is you run against some of those issues. One of the things I've thought of to try to address that is perhaps constructing deep reverb tails out of different techniques than the early reverbs, which are like immediate reflections. You get a set of reflections early on. They're not necessarily following quite the same pattern as all this. But this is not going to be done with some kind of gain ramping thing or whatever. We need to focus on the tail with this stuff, because this is not something I'm going to be able to code into this as such, unless it becomes a factor of using the size control, and that's a fair question. So we've got size that goes from 1 to 100. So what I was talking about earlier with regard to, and let's move these offsets over, because this is like dialing in the setting. This is not permanent. Let's start getting some of our numbers from here. namely, and since size is, actually, you know what? Size has to be that, but we can literally do the 1 to 0 to 1. So regen offset and interp offset are reading that parameter over again. That parameter is our size control. It goes from 0 to 1, or from 1 to 100, because it's not really supposed to go to literally 0. I think I can actually use this in such a way where this is giving me a number that is of some use. So what we need to do to the depth factor is we've got everything set the same way if size is a certain amount. And size is going to want to start out at 0.1 is my default there. Whereas so I can set up depth factor to be a certain thing. It is 1.0 minus get parameter param4. So at full crank, it's 1.0 minus 0, and its depth factor is 1.0 minus this thing. So we get 1, basically. And anything smaller than that is fading away. And it's always going to be really, 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 really close to 1. So what we're going to do here is try to manipulate that, knowing that it's this really delicate operation. We can't just go like, oh, 1.0 minus 0.1, boom, you're instantly have no reverb. Like all of these controls in the middle of the thing, it's like 0.5 to the 4th power. So 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5 equals 1 minus 0.0625. So halfway down, which is already incredibly short, like there's no sustained there, is only 0.9375. That's already too much for most of it. So yeah, console 7 does that on purpose. I did that on purpose. That's definitely intentional. But you guys talking about how you're supposed to, like, explain to me how you're supposed to affect only the beginning of a reverb sound that is a continuous process happening at all times. Like the beginning of one sound is the RT60 45 seconds later of another sound. You never have just one part of the sound all at once. So that's a concern. If you can figure that one out, let me know. I'll build it into the reverb. So we got regen offset and interpolation offset. We're scaling it. I feel like this get parameter param4 full crank is the most reverb. Small amounts of change. Keep it very, because this whole like depth factor, I could be literally doing, this is what's confusing me at the moment, is as far as Fibonacci is concerned, it's more interesting to work with primes. Prime numbers combine better. You want to use a set of primes that are about 50% to 100% of delay times. That's what we've got. That's what we've got there. It's fairly similar to what the all-verb folks did, or the free verb guy did, but it's not exactly the same. It just happens to be a good set. So we could do depth factor of literally just get parameter param4. That would work. It's just the instant you went off of full crank, it would just die away completely, and that's not what we want. Although, no, it really kind of isn't what we want. So what we're doing is, let's put this in parentheses and space it out a little bit so that I can focus on the area that I'm thinking about. This is sort of the guts of it. So minus from this means less sustain. So logically, this plus the size control size smaller for small and fast and falling away too fast. Larger. You see, this is why I didn't finish school, is I get stuck with stuff like this. But I'll hang in there with this, and you can watch me be stumped for minutes or hours on end until I finally get to the end of it. But I will get to the end of it. I may not be quite as determined as my little brother who does the corporate programming, because he is a fiend about stuff like this. But I'm still the same blood, and I still have the same mojo, and so I will get to the end of this. So depth factor, param4, it's going to want to be less than 1 to not be perfect sustain. And we're going to want it to be larger if it's a small... God damn it, is that really true? We're going to want it to be smaller if it's a large size. So what we want is actually... Stop that. Man, that's not what I meant doing at all. What we want is actually... What did I just say? Can you repeat to me what I just said? 1 is ultimate sustain. 1 at size needs to be not as much sustain. So if we have get param4 here, and we've got the offset so we can adjust the scale of it, then if size is small, the value of size is going to be, or param6 is going to be 0. And that's going to be maximum sustain. If size is large, it needs to have less, so we're subtracting. That's what I was trying to get to. Sometimes it's the dumbest things you get stuck on. So and we're going to set it up that way so that it continues to be changed into a very tiny amount, like regen offset is getting adjusted by our trim control. Probably what we're going to do is, well, we're just going to experiment. That's what we're going to do. And then I also want to throw in the other one. Blend is the high frequency fill. So that needs to, it's nearly 1. It's a fairly high amount. We're not using that much interpolation to darken things. But with long sustains or large size, we needed to roll off way more. Therefore, blend being a large number for bright means that it needs to be a smaller number when size is big. So we subtract interp offset. And it looks like it's the same, but it's really not, because it's doing a very different thing. Hey, thank you, June 21 Leatherus. So having thrashed through that stuff, we now have a size control, and the size control is going to, well, let's find out. Like if I've got this sorted out, it will work and it will do the thing that I want. I keep trying to think in circles around it, and it's just deeply frustrating. And I've done something wrong. What do we need? 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 2, 1. I need another one of these. And that is probably space it a little differently so I can see what belongs where. So power 1 minus this minus that. And let's try that again. This time it ought to build. And having done so, I'm snuffly because I'm not super well. I swear since March I've just been struggling. I will hang in there as long as I can. Oh no, it's still in use. That's because we need to quit out of this. And probably that. There we go. Nah, wrong thing. What are you doing? Putting it in bookmarks, that's dumb. How about we remove that from sidebar, shall we? Getting into that cranky zone. Yeah, I know you folks are trying to do what I'm doing. You can see how difficult it can be. Back to note silence. I'm also going to jump in here, click on that, and be able to refresh our memory for yeah, you guys, I don't think you're right about that. That in the digital domain, the near infinitesimal values can feed back and have a cascading effect. The cistern has a different behavior that darks out the noise. No, we're talking about just the way that these things decay and fall off. I'm using a variety of different algorithms to do it, and the trick is getting it to do something useful. So what we got here, let's scooch this over, and that wasn't helpful, but I can put the cursor like right here, and then we have two channels, and it says near as damn it to be in at the beginning of the file instead of at the end because it will wrap. Room size is totally wrong. Room size should be 0.1, which is still not good, but so here's the thing. I'm not sure if it's actually perfect, but it's kind of close. So here's the deal. If I do a larger one and I increase reg offset, can I make it drop away really fast? With offset being 0, no, it's the same, but aha, we have a result. With reg offset set up this high, I can make the small stuff much sustainier than the long stuff. So here's the thing. Maximum room size. Too much. Let's start dialing it in. I'm thinking that's still going to be too much. But this is starting to get the results we need. Although it might still not be perfect because our tiny room size might just feed back. Or not, okay. Yeah, that's just weird, but we can live with that, I think. See, as it stretches out, it starts to sustain enough that we can call that workable. After all, the cistern is a large space. So our tiny settings, this is tolerable. Like, we don't really need to make regeneration be much bigger, although I probably can ease it up a little. And I'm not really concerned if that is not literally RT60, although maybe we're getting there. We're already getting a nonlinearity on feedback in the sense of the interpolation, which I have yet to fool with. Okay, so that was falling away too fast, but it was sort of in the zone. Now if we use a longer room size, it's sustaining in a useful way. And let's go full crank. Room size 1. Can we make this so that this is accurately RT 60 of 45 seconds? If so, then we can work out the rest of it if we even need to. And it's going to sound weird, but the idea is this needs to fall off in the correct way. I'm thinking we have too much. Yeah, it's never going to make it all the way to 45 seconds. Less. This is giving us our constants of what we need to plug into the algorithms so that the room size has a consistent decay the whole time. And that, I think, is going to be, look, see how it's still hanging in there? That's going to be too much. Maybe not by a large amount, but it's going to be too much. Yeah, look at that, still hanging in. 1.4. Yeah, I mean, the reason the beginning sounds weird is because the householder algorithm hits you with all of these delays and echoes, but they just sort of feed into each other in such a way that by the time you've sustained for a while, it's just infinite quantities of echoes, like piling on top of each other. Whereas if you and I've made it sound as unnatural as I can with this source material. Also, our vibrato depth is working okay, and we need to cut that back a little more. Let's try 1.5 and see where that's getting. Our vibrato depth, let's take that down to 0.3 while we're at it, and crank up the speed a little bit. We're just gonna, this is the curse of working with computers, is you start to make good looking numbers. And that's not a musical thing. But if you can't really hear the difference between 0.06 and 0.060157, you're probably going to go for 0.06 just because you're being guided by what you see. Now, as far as what we can see but also hear, is this in fact going to fall back enough that we have our RT60 correct? I should also be able to use this snare sample and it'll do the same thing. It shouldn't matter too much what the loudness or whatever is. It'll just get there eventually. And then I'll go back to smaller room sizes and see if they behave, if they do the same thing or the correct thing. No, we're still hanging on to that sound. Let's try 16. Let's try 17. Let's see if we can go to the other extreme. Because with delays this long, it's always going to sound incredibly artificial. Having shorter delay sounds a lot more natural, but I need to get it so that it's doing the right kind of fall off even when set that extremely. Because if I can do that, then you can dial in any setting in the middle and they will all sound correct. And this is starting to look more plausible. Okay, almost there. Let's see what we get out of 0.19. I mean, technically I should have it peaking to full tilt. Then we're close enough to the I think that it'll have more of an effect. The way it's sustaining, it matters less whether we hit fully up to 0 or whether we hit up to -6 or whatever, because it's in general going to be doing the right things. And it's hanging in there a little bit more, and then there we are at RT60. And we're more or less out. So let's call it 185 and start fooling with room size. Here's a medium room size. And again, this is a maximum regeneration. We're trying to do the limits of the behavior of air here. And it's hanging in a little more than I would like, honestly. Also, we're not doing any of the interpolation yet. Yep, that was a little more than I want. Let's take the regeneration back to 0.81 and see where we get. Because we're on the right track here. Also, joke, I wonder whether you've been in physical spaces like this, because it can get kind of stupid. If you clap in a weird giant space like that, it does make crazy initial reverb effects. It's just that you're not hearing it as such, because this is the equivalent of like a room several miles on a side, and if you're not in a room several miles on a side, you're not really going to get a sense of what that means. That's hanging in a little bit longer than I like. Let's do a tiny one. Any place where the walls are like 40, 100 or so feet away from you, it's going to give you sort of unusual behavior. I think we've got a ballpark thing going on here where it's kind of sort of working. In fact, I think I'm okay with giant room size falling away a little bit too fast. I think the curve works for me with that, because we're talking about such huge spaces anyhow. Our impossibly large room sizes should fall away a little faster. Let's go to the 1.9 of this, or even a 0.2 and see what we get. And we'll go back to the 8.2 that we had for the small space. Tiny. Impossibly huge. Yeah, I'm happy with that, but now what we've got to do is get this kind of fall off. Because what we're hearing a lot of here is something that I'm not modulating, which is you're hearing echoes off the floor, echoes off the ceiling, echoes off one wall, and then all the other walls are really far away. So it's making it weird. And we can't really model that in the algorithm. Householder don't do that. Bounce back to the verb. Let's go back to, thank goodness it remembers my settings is all I can say. The snare sound, which will give me a little better handle on, and let's normalize that while we're at it. Make it be a little louder. And fire up our sound again. This is also one reason people use all-pass filters. Bear in mind that this entire thing is being done without all-pass filters. All-pass filters normally smooth out the percussiveness of some of these sounds to cause them to be more of a slower, fluid attack, but that is also going to have a negative effect on the decay. Like, you don't need the all-pass filter this far back. You need the all-pass filter right up at the front. So let's see now. Room size, we'll do a small. Can you see those controls? I think I needed to move it. Needed to put it there, and then you can see it. So when we had room size of 0.1, we had about the right fall off, if I remember correctly. And so for a huge room size, that should hang on for too long, and it needs to die away faster. Yeah. So let's find out what happens when we throw in interp offset. It's doing it. So this is how we do that. Is we have our room size. Tiny room sizes are need a very small offset. Medium sizes are going to linger, but we're trying to find a interp offset off of what this interp blend thing is, and as we increase the number, it falls away faster on room size. So the huge room size is kind of falling away quick. If there was none, it's clearly being too bright. And with a large offset, it's fallen away super fast. So what we do is we find roughly the right amount. There's a rattling noise in there that was useful. That's what I needed. At about 9:40, or a little earlier. This sound is what I needed to refer to. So what we're doing with the twisted wave and the Reverb plugin is should it be faster? Maybe not quite as fast as that. And then if we had a smaller room size, I feel like maybe that needs to fall off a hair quicker than that. Smaller, larger. Larger still. Compared with this stuff. And back to this. Darken it maybe a little faster than that. Smaller room size. Larger. Larger still. See, the echoes should be all different densities and stuff, but the feeling of the way that the air has it falling off should be all the same. Even when it's clearly the wrong pattern of echoes. And again, it should go to about RT60 of 45 seconds. That being the maximum limit of what air will do. And I think we're getting into the zone here. Let's see whether we can do our impossible to resist tweaking of numbers so that you only have one decimal point. And the sound falls away and falls away. That sounds roughly about right. Then room size of medium huge. Still Titanic. Smaller. 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 Compared to I think I've gone a little too far. That's the rough sound of high frequencies decaying. We'll hear those again. Then the plugin. Nasty clang, but is the tone of how it dies away better? More sustain. I think we're approximating what it needs to be. Thankfully, it saves those things. So now, to say farewell to my stream, since it's 1:11 and I've been beating myself into the ground on this stuff, so I need to go and rest. Let's take a moment and hear a track into the same reverb, probably turned way down so that it doesn't bury you. So here's my track Wood Dragon into this ginormous infinite reverb. Regular and the cistern. But wait, there's more. We can change the room size and it'll behave the same. Huge cistern size. Or and a little bit of the raw sound. So this is kind of what it would sound like in practice if you were combining the sound. And that would be the sound of ultimate reverb sustain. Although probably there's tweaking I can still do to it to make it better. I'm not entirely thrilled with how this is working out. Let's make the room smaller. And seeing as we can fiddle with springiness without worrying about breaking the rest of it, spring reverb sound. Change the size of that around a little. Or huge. Or more of a plate reverb sound. Definitely a kind of a platiness vibe in there. And then back to the full crank. Maximum reverb sustain in air. RT60, 45 seconds, infinite cistern. So when you put your band into something like this, you lose everything but the reverb be sustained. here we have pretty close to an infinite cistern there. With that, I'm going to call it an evening, and we'll pick back up on this later when I have other things to do with it. For now, I'll talk to you folks later. It's been a fun afternoon. I feel like I've gotten some useful things happening out of this. We'll see where we take this crazy reverb thing.